Hi, I'm Matthew Might, and it's a pleasure to be here at the Fifth International Vatican Conference. About 13 years ago, I became a new father. And at the same time, I had also just become a newly minted professor in computer science. And as a shiny new professor slash father, I remember holding my infant son in my arms and telling him, "You know, Bertrand, you're very lucky. I'm going to be the most loving and supportive parent you could ever imagine. Unlike some parents, I will support you in whatever you want to do in life. And what I mean by that is, I really don't care in which field of engineering you get your PhD, as long as you're happy." Now, what I could not have known in that moment was that while Bertrand would never get a PhD, many would someday get a PhD in Bertrand. You see, while Bertrand was about a year old, I got a call. Bertrand was at the hospital and he was dying. Not right away, as it turns out, but his heart, his liver, his lungs, and his brain were all racing to remove him from this earth. It seemed to be some kind of genetic disorder. But we had no name for what caused him severe developmental delays, seizures, motor control problems, and perhaps most curiously, a lack of tears. And after many rounds of testing trying to explain this, doctors had finally learned enough to say that he had a year, or at best two, of life left. As a family, we kept a blog for him. And on that day, on his blog, I posted something. We don't know how long he has, but some searching indicates he may live to 3 years or just beyond. We are holding on to what little hope is left, but it seems that the window for miracles is about to close. Of course, we will do everything possible for him. And if that fails, we'll try the impossible. Before long, we had done everything possible, yet we still had no answers. All that remained was the impossible. And if you want to do the impossible, you need to do science. Well, but what is science? I've been using an illustration for years with my students to explain science, so I'll share it with you. I want you to imagine all of human knowledge as contained within this circle. And if you're a scientist, you spend your life toiling at this boundary between the known and the unknown. And you push until one day this boundary gives way. And this little dent you've made is called science. And this is how science enables the impossible. That's because science is the systematic transformation of the unknown into the known. And by extension, it is also the transformation from the impossible to the possible. What follows now is Bertrand's journey into the impossible. Bertrand did not live just a year or two more, as his medical team had quite reasonably predicted. In fact, Bertrand outlived every prediction ever made by over a decade, passing away recently just shy of 13 years old, a life 6 times longer than predicted, and a life far richer than I could have ever hoped for him. Bertrand's life came to define, invent, and propel the field of precision medicine, a movement that continues to transform the lives of patients just like him. Over the course of his life, he would come to cheat death so many times as he advanced this new field that for him, the improbable became an approximation of the impossible, or if you prefer, the lens of faith, and you want to define a miracle as a 1 in a million event, then as you will see, Bertrand's life was a miracle many times over. On the day that I was told that Bertrand had perhaps a year left to live, I was also told that there was nothing that could be done for him. Fortunately, Bertrand's diagnostic odyssey dovetailed with the emergence of the ability to sequence the human genome, a sudden ability to read our DNA, the book for the blueprint of human life itself. It was long suspected that the book of Bertrand had a typo or two inside of it. And remarkably, we can now look for those typos. So he became one of the first human beings to undergo sequencing of his DNA to find such answers. And it worked. Bertrand's disease finally had a name, NGLY1 or NGLY1 deficiency. And then came the bombshell. Bertrand was the first documented case of this disease, the first human being known to be missing this gene, NGLY1. He was, in effect, a patient zero. He was alone. Yet incredibly, I could suddenly calculate the odds of his being born with this condition. And it works out to 1 in many millions. With those kinds of odds, some people win the lottery. But I was far luckier. I got Bertrand as my son. And once more, I was told that there was nothing to be done, that the diagnosis was inactionable. The problem is it's really hard to understand a disease with just one patient. I knew we needed more. So in order to find more patients, I used a secret weapon, Google. Now, obviously, Googling for patients didn't work since it's a new disease. Instead, I wanted to make it possible for other patients to Google Bertrand. So I used social media. I wrote a blog post called Hunting Down My Son's Killer. It was really meant to do two things. It was meant to rank highly in Google search results, and it was meant to go viral. And it did both. So other patients started to find that blog post. They started to find Bertrand. Today, 9 years later, there are dozens of patients connected around the globe. Soon, I learned enough to make some calculations. About 5 years ago, I calculated that a compound called N-acetylglucosamine might be therapeutic for Bertrand because, in effect, his body didn't have enough of it. And this is great because it turns out you can just buy this on Amazon. So I ordered a bag and I ate it, and the entire bag, in fact. And I woke up the next morning and I was not dead. So I concluded that this compound had now passed FDA phase 1 safety testing because in my household, I am the FDA. But it's one thing to experiment on yourself. It's another entirely to do this with a child, especially your own child. And I remember thinking, if he dies and this bag was just sitting on my shelf and I never even tried it, there would be no way to forgive myself. And I'll never forget what happened. About 3 days after he took it for the very first time, he cried in a condition where no child with this disease makes tears. And and this child was now crying tears for the first time in his life. So I did what every parent watching their child cry for the first time does. I collected his tears. I packed them on dry ice and I shipped them to a glycobiologist in California for analysis. And those may have been a few small tears for Bertrand that day, and he cried many more since. But they swelled into an ocean of science for the disorder as a whole. From that day onward, Bertrand's vision never again had a problem. And this success gave me the courage to keep pushing, to look for other treatments that could help Bertrand, to ask, can we do more than make him cry? And to aggressively oversummarize 3 years of work in one word, yes. After 3 years, and after many sacrificed mutant worms and mice, after computer simulations, after intensive laboratory testing, my team and I found another drug. And it just so happened that this drug was already approved for a completely different condition. And that drug is Prevacid, which was originally developed for acid reflux. Over the next several years, Bertrand hit milestones that seemed previously impossible. Specifically, he began to speak with an eye-gaze computer. When I walked in the door about a year ago, he called out, "Hello, Matt is my dad." Or really, his computer did. In Bertrand's language, this meant, "Welcome home, Daddy." In fact, as Bertrand's underlying condition became more challenging, many long hours in the trenches of science seemed to produce miracle after miracle. In one extreme instance, during a 5-week ICU stay, Bertrand was on the brink of death from a mysterious infection. At his bedside, I conducted 4 rounds of metagenomic sequencing. I extended an artificial intelligence agents, and I found the cause of the infection and ultimately the cure to give him yet another year of life. In the end, Bertrand benefited from several more advances in what we now call precision medicine, a field that harnesses the power of artificial intelligence and genomic science to tailor treatments to individual patients. Notably, Bertrand went from having dozens of seizures per day down to none. But tears per hour and seizures per day and even years per life are poor metrics for measuring the good life. There is no one metric for the good life, but if one must measure, then perhaps the best metric is the one measured in smiles per hour. And by this measure, by happiness, Bertrand lived the good life. Sadly, 6 months ago, Bertrand ran out of miracles. Another mystery infection ravaged his body. Once again, I applied science to figure it out, but it quickly became clear to me that this time, I'd run out of time for science. In less than 48 hours from the first sign he was ill, after the shortest hospital stay of his life, he was gone. But Bertrand's impact on the world is far from over. Over the course of his life, a father's love always compelled me to become whatever he needed. So when he needed a biologist, I studied biology until I ended up on the faculty at the Harvard Medical School. And when he needed an entirely new field of medicine, I advocated until the White House gave me the job offer of a lifetime to help launch President Obama's Precision Medicine Initiative. But most of the time, Bertrand just needed love. So as a father, I held him. In the course of trying to help Bertrand, he taught me how to help others like him. As a result, I now spend all of my time as director of an Institute for Precision Medicine at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. My team works with hundreds of patients like Bertrand every year. We apply science in the service of these patients, and I get to see these patients, like Kelsey here, go from their darkest hours to their brightest days. And while what we do day to day is science, what we provide is hope, because hope is a fundamental human right that belongs to all of us, even to those of us with the rarest of diseases. Thank you.